Today, let's look at using a DM screen. What should be on the back, on the front, how to make the most out of them, when to use them, and even if we should use a DM screen. So DM screens, the best ones come signed with the members of the C team. But honestly, they also can have some pretty bizarre features. I don't know if you've seen, the material that is on the DM screen for Acquisitions Incorporated C team, but it is not your typical DM screen, and really good if you want to know things like a table of flame types, dungeon sense, or when a kobold emerges from a hole swinging, what it's doing. Pretty darn useful, actually, the more that I look at it. So that's one reason to use a DM screen. And there are all kinds of DM screens for all kinds of games, right? Like here's for the One Ring, absolutely beautiful looking screen. Just incredible what it looks like, the art of it. And then even on the inside, it's just incredibly beautiful to look at if you can read that small font. That's what I want to look at today is DM screens, why you might want to use them, what is neat about them, what they can do as a psychological effect to make our games possibly better, and also how we customize that screen to make the most out of it. To do that, we're going to need to take a trip into my gaming room. Welcome to my gaming table, which I think I'll look at in a future video. But for now, here is my DM screen. And let's start with the question of why? Why use a DM screen? And I will tell you why I do. And it's a couple of reasons. One is the cosmetics. So look at that Deadlands screen, which I have in front of my normal DM screen. And that is a cool scene that I think is inspiring of the type of play. So along with anything else that I may have on the table, like the handouts and the rules and all those kinds of things that let you know, hey, we're playing Deadlands, that screen helps. Now, the screen itself, whatever you may have as a visual from the side of the players, does sort of help establish that the DM is someone different than the other players. You're not just a random person at the table, you're running this game. And it does give it a little bit of a sort of, I'm in this cockpit, I'm commanding this thing, I'm running the game, I'm doing the job that I have. I find it particularly useful when I am teaching new players at conventions. You walk up to that table and you see the person who is sitting behind that screen, you know that's the DM, right? If you've ever gone to a convention table and you're like, which person is the DM? A screen clears that right up. It kind of commands a little bit of authority. I really think that's true. That doesn't mean it's essential. And especially in the more collaborative a game may be, you may say to yourself, I don't want that demarcation. I want to feel like just another part of the gang. And that's absolutely cool too. But it can sort of set things up and it can be fun. Like when I use some of the older screens for fun, right? If I'm running Spelljammer and I bring in a second edition Spelljammer screen, people kind of smile. Or sometimes I'll run Advanced Dungeons & Dragons DM screen in front of my notes. And that also makes people chuckle and, oh, I remember that old screen, or oh my goodness, what is that? How is that old? Are you really that old? Yes. Uh-huh. And so it can be fun, right? Maybe you're running a horror 5th edition game, but you use an alien DM screen to connote what you're doing, right? That's kind of a neat way to capture the flavor and theme. At least as important is what's behind the screen. So we're going to talk a lot about that today. So I have a section of my collection that is actually all DM screens. I have a few others upstairs as well, but I have everything from a plastic lined one where you can slip in whatever you'd like. It was part of a D20 Monkey Kickstarter, and I can put in either these pictures or I can put in my own custom rules and art facing the players. Those can be fun. I don't love the plastic nature of it. There are all kinds of official screens, of course, and then there are campaign-specific screens. And so let's take a look at some of these. Going back in time, we can find DM screens that clearly knew, really from the beginning, that we wanted to be impressed by really cool art, right? And so we can look at some of these older Dungeon Master screens. They are giving us the art that's going to be cool to look at, as well as all kinds of tables. And they're trying to give us all those reference tables. Now, we can always question these. For example, did we really need the psionic attacks and defenses in our Advanced Dungeons & Dragons screen to be front and center in the very middle panel? No. The assassin's table for assassination is the top left. That's great if you've got an assassin in the party. And gee, shouldn't the assassin have that? But okay, it was an era of the time, right? But some other things like grenade, like missiles, is something to look at. But it's amazing how much of this table is not of particularly high utility. And that is something that happens all the way to the modern era. We can do things like see the old AD&D attack tables, which is great because my old Advanced Dungeons & Dragons Dungeon Master Guide was always worn out in this section. So having this on the table was really great. We have neat products like the Dungeon Master screen for Spelljammer for Advanced Dungeons & Dragons 2nd Edition, which had this amazingly cool looking graphic. It also came with 3D models, but it allows us to have a really neat scene that is just so cool to inspire play. And I love that, right? So like currently, I've got that neat Savage Worlds Deadlands screen in front of my actual screen. I'll talk about that in a second, because it's just so cool to look at that. It's neat to have that cinematic kind of flavor going on to inspire the game. And the rules, again, inside may be useful or not. In this case, if we are actually running a lot of ship-to-ship combat, then having those old siege weapons and ship ratings was actually quite helpful. And I used this screen a lot back in the day. One of the key challenges we have these DM screens is, that balance between having really cool art and the utility on the inside. Like, it's fun that they're showing us these minis because I know they want to sell them in 3.5, but did I really need them eating up acreage? Nope. But what is nice is, lists of skills and different DCs for different things that might come up, especially obscure things. That is really helpful to see. We can compare that to the latest 2024 Dungeon Master's Dungeon Master's screen, and what kind of things we get here, right? So we get a list of conditions, which is always helpful, especially if we're trying to learn the conditions that we're not familiar with or that may have changed. How to improvise damage is an interesting choice. And we have different damage severity by level is useful for making adjudication on the fly. Actions, we have skills, so that's kind of helpful. If you're new to 2024, this is actually really helpful. So I love this as a beginning screen because it captures right here on this central two panels, because it's a 1, 2, 3, 4 panel screen. These two panels really give us a lot of what we need, right? What our actions are, jumping and concentration. These are things that the team has thought about a lot as they've created 5th edition panels on the inside of their Dungeon Master screen. And here I think they really do a good job of capturing what you need when you're new to the rules. And that's kind of something that's really interesting to me, because if I look at this Deadlands screen that is so neat looking, when I look on the inside, I do not actually see the list of skills. It's not there. And this has actually a number of options on it that I have almost never used running Deadlands. There are a few things that do come up, and I refer to them, but they're not as important as you might think. So that leads me to customize my screen.
So I want to pause and make the point here that one of the reasons we want to use a DM screen is that visual, for sure. But then we get into that inside, right? And what I was trying to show here is that different DM screens are trying to struggle with the fact that they don't know whether you're a new DM, an experienced DM, a person who just really wants to focus on the campaign at hand. So all of that makes it really challenging for the designer to make a great DM screen. And that's one of the reasons why we're going to get into the topic of customization. But I want to first say, hey, think about if you were to use a DM screen, or if you already do, and you're trying to think of how could you change that up to be a cool DM screen? Think about what is going on in your campaign right now, right? What are the rules that you're constantly having to look up or refer to, right? Do you need a list of skills? Like if you're running 5th edition, you've been running it forever, maybe you don't need that at all, but you might if you're newer, or if this is a new RPG. What are the rules that you really need? What are the campaign specific rules, right? Like we've been talking to Mastering Dungeons about running nautical encounters and campaigns. So that's where the underwater rules would be hugely important to have right there in front of you, right? And as we start to come up with this list, we'll end up towards what is useful. We also want to think about campaign-specific things like the names of our characters, the factions that are in play, the important NPCs. Maybe you're the kind of DM who loves having things like a list of NPC names that you can just choose from, right? Or neat locations or fodder for making up somebody who's coming by, right? Like distinctive features or the way to describe a part of the city or jungle or whatever it is that you're in. Those kinds of things can be really useful. And we'll see more of that after we get through customization. But as I'm about to say, we're going to look at what other people have done for customization first.
Before we get to how I customize, let's talk about how other folks customize. So Gale Force 9 had the contract for a long time with Dungeons & Dragons to create official licensed screens for each of their adventures. You can also find a variety of these or variation on these through Beetle and Grimm's, who would create DM screens as part of the package. And what was neat about these screens is that they created a art that was entirely from the adventure, and then on the inside, things that were specific to the adventure. You can see a similar approach in both of these early screens where they have encounter tables specific to Storm King or Tomb of Annihilation. And you can see that's quite a lot of acreage. 2 panels or 1.5 panels are spent on that. And then Portney and Zyro encounters on the side. So it's really 2 panels for encounter types. Here we get for Storm King, the Sword Coast is actually, all of that space is spent to cover the kind of adventure map, which is useful if there is nothing else to go on there. You'll have to decide that yourself. We have things like Chultan treasure tables, what it's like to travel, which is very useful, and another on traveling the north, which is available here. So you can see sort of a similar theme about moving along and dealing with the conditions of the adventure. Now, I generally like these. I, in fact, used this, the table, the Chult DM screen when I was running Tomb of Annihilation. But what's interesting is you're sacrificing all of those rules you would look up, right? If you want to have the list of conditions or the list of skills or typical DCs or whatever, well, if you don't need that because you've memorized it and you're an expert DM, you're all good. But if you want those things, well, you're not getting them now, or you're sacrificing that. And so you're kind of in this in-between world of do you want the adventure and content or do you want something else? D&D has even created special screens for exploration, unfortunately using the 2014 rules. They had a sort of wilderness outdoor set of DM screens that are quite neat and have some very beautiful art. Another thing to consider with screens is sort of how tall you want them to be, which blocks your sight of the players of you, and that can be advantageous, but also can mean that you want to sit up a little higher, like have some cushion so you can see over everybody. Some screens, like you can see a Savage Worlds, is a very small one. We can see here these comparative sizes. Right, you can see how much smaller this is, which is a really nice way if you want to have a small, concise screen to use. And then you can see behind it, I have this custom wooden screen that was given out. Thank you, Wizards, was given out to some folks. And that is huge. It's much bigger than even this. It's like a whole page height versus page on its size. So the 8.5 by 11 size is kind of moon on the side. This is even a little bigger. And then what I end up doing is customizing it. So let's talk about what I do to customize my DM screen. And this is really how I prefer to look at DM screens, right? So one thing is I love the idea of having that cosmetic view, right? So that's why I have this Savage Worlds Deadlands screen, is it gives me a neat picture to hopefully inspire play, right? I also like the idea of having these kinds of custom tables, and specific to the adventure, but they often don't quite match what I want, and what I want changes, right? When I'm in Portney and Zyro, the only part of this that I need is this tiny little piece right there. This is a lot of acreage I'm wasting. And then conversely, later, I won't need that at all once I leave Portney and Zyro, right? And these treasure tables, that probably doesn't match how I give out treasure. You know, these travel rules aren't granular enough for the way travel runs or I run it. So, you know, you end up wanting to have your own version. And that's what I do. Because I have magnets on the inside of this screen, I can just, in fact, I use old Alia Tool magnets, if you recognize those from old 3rd edition days. I have things like my list of skills, in Savage Worlds Deadlands, so that I can always see those and call for particular checks. I have behind it a list of all of the hindrances and edges that can be used by characters or by monsters, because monsters will refer to them. If you're familiar with D&D 3rd edition, they'll say things like it has the blah edge, and you need to be able to look that up really quickly. So that's my handout that allows me to do that. Then I have information on my characters and notes about things that are happening with them. I'll zoom over that just in case they're looking. I'm currently running the adventure Horror at Headstone Hill. So one of my panels here, right after the characters, is actually a list of locations. So I have important information like secrets and clues and things like that I need to find in all of these 60 different locations in the town, because the town of Headstone Hill or Heaston Hill is full of all kinds of mysteries. And so I need to be able to track all of these locations, which is a lot of work. And thus I have my cheat sheet. I also have my own special Deadlands journey exploration rules, which I've made on my own with some inspiration from what the One Ring RPG does. And then I have other towns and what are the secrets in there in case we decide to travel to those other towns. So that is all pinned on the top of my board or my DM screen. And what I can do is change between those when I need to. Then below it, I have things that I might hold back. If I were running minis, I would have special minis hidden behind here so nobody can see them. I might even put a little piece of cloth over them. I have some things like cards they've played that matter, and I keep reference to that. Lists of monsters, cheat sheets of rules, current plots that I'm going to feed off of, and then some handouts that I've got around there that I can't show you too much of, and my tray where I roll dice. I put my drink here, and then I've got the action deck, adventure deck here, and Twilight events that are part of the adventure, and some extra dice if I need them. And that's what's going on behind my screen, which makes it a pretty functional space. To some folks, this might look like controlled chaos. I hear you. But for me, this actually works pretty well to reasonably find what I want. And I'm often reviewing what goes on my screen every couple of sessions, and I might change to have something else there.
It's worth pointing out that sometimes a DM screen can just be fun. So I want to pause from the elaborate screen that I've set up, right? Which the point of it is really to help me run a better campaign. And here is an example of a screen that's kind of got some functional look up to it, but a lot of it is just about being fun.
Let's discuss the Monty Python role-playing game's incredible DM screen, which includes your choice of replacement heads that you can put in the front to signify what NPC you're actually playing. Or, a pop-up god arriving, or when you're on air or not, and a tracker for the number of complaints that you've received so far during the game. That's impressive. On the inside of the screen, we can see a number of absurd things that we can draw from. Here's that number of complaints received, core mechanics, the traits, and then a lot of different ideas here that we can use.
So there you have it. You've hopefully enjoyed this tour from everything from AD&D to TUI Spelljammer to 3.5 in a Dragon magazine, all across to the 5th edition latest, to what other games provide. And that's hopefully giving you some ideas, especially if you're not the kind of person who would have used DM screens. My big recommendation is if you run at conventions, using a DM screen is a great way to just make people feel like you know what you're doing. And hopefully you do, but just that presence of having a DM screen is kind of cool. It's kind of iconic, right? That's why we often see it in like Stranger Things and situations like that, because it kind of does set things up to be kind of neat, right? Now, then in your home campaigns, that's where you get to really think about whether you need the rules and whether this screen for this game provide you the rules that you need. You can customize it, right? You can clip things onto your screen. I used magnets, but paper clips work, string, tape, you name it. You can have a lot of fun customizing your screen so that it begins to be a place that you can easily look down at to get encounter information, character information, plot threads, locations, maps, your special rules. It can help you organize things that you just pull off and look at.
So there are a lot of ways that you can use these DM screens. There's a lot of flexibility here. Hopefully this video has given you some cool ideas, maybe help you reconsider how to use your DM screen for maximum benefit. If you like this video, yes, give me that thumbs up. I appreciate it. But even more important, share it with your friends. Let others know so they can find my channel, because that's the hardest thing to do in this business. And if you really like what I do, I love to see you at the Patreon. Please come to Patreon, search for Alphastream, and you'll find me there, or look at the links down below. It'll take you to there. You can also find ways to support me on my website at alphastream.org. Thanks, and keep giving me those great ideas for shows that you want to see. Maybe next time I'll do a tour of my gaming room and how I maximize my storage. Let me know. I'll see you next time.